You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans! Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and I have to start with a change involving NFL interviewing procedures. The NFL, thankfully, didn't put into effect anything that would improve teams' draft positions for hiring minorities. I don't mind giving them extra compensatory picks, but when you start messing with draft order like that, no, that's not good. I talked about that on Monday. I'm not going to go into that again. Instead, I want to talk about the changes that are actually going to happen. Dan Graziano of ESPN.com did a great job of breaking this down, so I'm getting it from that. Teams will now be required to interview at least 2 candidates from outside their organization for any vacant head coaching job, and at least 1 minority candidate from outside their organization for any vacant coordinator job. I think that makes perfect sense. Expand the Rooney Rule to interview more candidates. I think that's great. I have no problem with that at all. It'll put more coaches on teams' radars. We'll start hearing the names of other coaches that we've never heard of before. And if they're getting a bunch of interviews, hey, it gives them a chance to learn. They can figure out why they didn't get the job. And, there's no better teacher than rejection. I did something wrong. Well, okay, what did I do wrong so I can learn from it? There was a great quote that someone had, and I don't remember it exactly. There was this big mistake that some employee at a financial company made, and it cost the company a lot of money. The CEO said, "I'm not upset, I just spent a bunch of money to train him," or something like that. He didn't punish the employee. I mean, maybe he did behind the scenes, but he didn't fire him. There's no better teacher than experience. If you're getting in that interview room and you're talking to these teams for a head coaching job or a coordinator job, the more times you do it, the better you're going to get. Experience is the best teacher. That's a great, great, great move by the NFL. The NFL established a system that prohibits a club from denying an assistant coach the opportunity to interview with a new team for a bona fide coordinator position. So, in other words, let's take the Jets for example. Adam Gase is calling the plays. Their offensive coordinator is Dowell Loggins. If the Jets were to move on from Loggins and they wanted to interview the Minnesota Vikings quarterbacks coach, just hypothetically, the Vikings could turn that down. No, This isn't a bona fide opportunity. We're not going to let you poach him. But if Greg Williams were to be fired by the Jets and they wanted to interview the Indianapolis Colts defensive line coach, just hypothetically, the Colts could not stop that. That's a change that's been long overdue. I absolutely hate seeing that. This guy is an assistant secondary coach or an assistant wide receivers coach, and he can get a promotion to quarterbacks coach or a coordinator and you're blocking it. I hate that. That's a change that's been long overdue. Great job by the NFL there. Those rules also apply for assistant GM. Basically what that means is if you're a scout for the Giants and the Bills wanted to interview you for their vacant assistant GM position, the Giants could not block that. Again, great move. Every team will be required to submit an organizational flowchart with descriptions of each coach's specific responsibilities and any dispute over the definition of bona fide will be resolved by the commissioner. I have no problem with any of that. I'd actually like to see all the flowcharts. I doubt that they'll be made publicly available, but if they are, I'd love to see them. Sometimes you think that a coach is in charge of something when he's really not. The same thing with the front office. Great, great, great move by the NFL. The Rooney Rule will now be expanded to executive positions. So, GM, team president, and senior executive positions in other areas. You'll now have to interview minorities and or female applicants. Great move. Really, fantastic move. Maybe this means that Louis Riddick will go back in the NFL. Maybe this means that Champ Kelly will get a GM job. Great move. The more minorities that come to the forefront via interviews, the better. The last bullet point is really, really interesting. Each of the 32 NFL teams will establish a minority coaching fellowship program. The coaching fellowships are to be full-time positions, 1 or 2 years in length, and will provide NFL legends, minority and female participants with hands-on training in NFL coaching. So that will establish a larger pool of qualified candidates for head coaching jobs. Fantastic. That's great. Maybe that can be expanded to college students that are trying to break into the business. If you give them hands-on NFL training, maybe they can start as an assistant somewhere, work their way up the depth chart, and maybe they become a head coach after some time. I think that can be expanded. I think that's something that all leagues should do. These are all fantastic changes by the NFL. The worst thing that the NFL was considering was manipulating teams into hiring minorities that may not be the most qualified for the job. If you're going to give them a better draft position because they hired a minority, that's a huge issue. You're incentivizing teams to not necessarily hire the most qualified person for the job. I understand that we need more minorities in positions of power in the NFL. I get that. The Rooney Rule has failed, and I think these changes will help the Rooney Rule a lot. This will mean that people who may not have gotten the opportunity to interview before will get the opportunity to interview, and as we saw with Joe Judge, if you can ace an interview, you stand a good shot of getting that job. These are all fantastic changes. It's not too often you can say this, but great job, Roger Goodell. He's had a really good offseason. The draft went off without a hitch for the most part. Now these Rooney Rule changes? The NFL is killing it. There was one other element to the Rooney Rule proposal that got tabled that I did want to talk about. I just missed it on Monday. I'll talk about it now because I think it's really interesting. If the changes that were just instituted fail, this is something that could be done, and this is something I advocated for. This was tabled. Any team that hired a person of color as its quarterback's coach would have received a compensatory pick at the end of the 4th round if it retains that person beyond one season. As we all know, everyone is looking for the next Sean McVay. Being a quarterback's coach is a great way to maybe become a head coach like Zach Taylor, or you work your way up to offensive coordinator and then head coach. I think that would have been fine. I don't mind giving teams compensatory picks for hiring minorities. It's just when you start messing with draft position, that I don't like. You know, I was slated to have this pick in the 2nd round, and now all of a sudden I'm getting leapfrogged because I didn't hire a head coach that happened to be a minority. That's wrong. That's 100% wrong. But to give those teams extra picks at the end of a compensatory round, go for it. I'm all for that. I think that's great. The more picks, the better. It means that more kids are getting a shot to make an NFL roster. And this was in the tabled proposal also. If a minority assistant left to become a coordinator elsewhere, his former club would have received a 5th round compensatory pick. If a person of color left to become a head coach or a GM, his previous team would have received a 3rd round compensatory pick. I don't mind that at all. The compensatory picks are extra picks anyway. You get compensatory picks by losing a bunch of free agents and not signing a bunch of free agents. That's a built-in mechanism to give teams extra picks. I don't mind expanding that to hiring minorities. But when you start having teams leapfrog other teams because they hired a minority, that I don't like. I don't mind giving them extra picks at the end of those compensatory rounds. But don't have teams leapfrog other teams into the middle of any given round. That's wrong. I really think that if the new additions to the Rooney Rule fail, along with the changes to the anti-tampering stuff and the fellowship program, if all that doesn't result, in more minorities getting opportunities in the NFL, we'll see the compensatory pick proposal once again. And I won't mind that at all. Moving on now to the Patriots signing Patrick Chung to an extension. And I'm not crazy about it. It's for 2 years. He's now due up to $12.8 million over the next 4 years. And I don't think that's a wise investment for a safety that looks like he's lost a step. He's 33 years old. According to Pro Football Focus, last year he had a 55.6 overall grade. And let me tell you, that's a very, very fair grade. He only played 654 snaps. That's his lowest total since 2012. And that's counting the playoffs. He didn't even play a lot in the wild card game against the Titans. He only played 12 snaps. I mean, there's a reason the Patriots drafted Kyle Duggar. They saw that Chung was getting up there, and they wanted to draft his replacement. Now, I understand that Chung will be a good teacher for Duggar. I don't like Duggar. I think Duggar's going to bust. I thought that was an egregious reach. But he's going to benefit by having Chung to learn from and watch. I just don't like this investment. I think there were better routes that the Patriots could have gone when it comes to safety in extending Chung and drafting Duggar. In talking about this extension, you have to bring up Duggar. It's just that simple. They're joined at the hip. Alright, it's Trifecta time, and that means I'm going to recap the Detroit Lions draft class. The Lions started their draft off by picking a guy who I knew wasn't going to fall to the Jets. I'm not deluding myself into thinking that. But he was the guy who in a perfect world I wanted for the Jets. Jeff Okudah is one of the best cornerback prospects we've had in the draft since maybe Deion Sanders. He does everything right. I understand he's not good in run support. I don't care. I've said this 1,000 times. I don't want my corners to be good tacklers. Alright, Darrelle Revis wasn't a good tackler. An NFL throwback tweeted out the clips of him locking down Megatron. It brought back some really good memories for me. Okudah is going to be a great Lion. Him and Desmond Trufant should be a really good 1-2 punch. DeAndre Swift made no sense for the Lions. I like Swift a lot. DeAndre Swift, to me, was the best running back in this draft. I had him as the 20th best prospect in this draft. So to get him at 35 isn't the issue. The thing is, the Lions already have Kerryon Johnson. They drafted Ty Johnson last year out of Maryland, who I really liked. They also have Bo Scarborough. They had backups for Kerryon Johnson. By taking Okudah at 3, which was the right pick, the Lions bypassed their biggest need, which was defensive tackle. Ross Blacklock was sitting there for the Lions. Instead, they take a running back, a position that they didn't need. It's nothing against Swift. It's nothing against the running back position. But that pick made no sense whatsoever. Julian Okwara is a great story. He moved here from Nigeria in the 3rd grade, worked his tail off, got to Notre Dame, played well there, and he earned his right to be in this league. Really, really good player. I don't like him in one-on-one battles, and I don't think he can play 3 downs, but he's a smart player, really good against the run, good tackler, he's just not that strong. The biggest knock on him is his durability. This guy only played 9 games last year. And in his 4 years at Notre Dame, he only played 35 games. That's not that good. That's less than 9 a season. If Okwara can stay healthy, he's going to be a really good player in this league for a long time. If not, he's going to bust. It's a big risk, but it's a risk worth taking in the early 3rd round. That fit his range perfectly. There's no question that the Lions needed to draft a guard since they lost Graham Glasgow to the Broncos. But to take Jonah Jackson in the middle of the 3rd round, that made no sense. I just don't think he has what it takes to be a good offensive lineman in this league. I don't like his hands. I don't like his body. His base just isn't that good. Jonah Jackson was a guy who I had like a late 4th round grade on. The fact that the Lions took him in the middle of the 3rd round is insane to me. Logan Stenberg is another offensive lineman. I don't like that the Lions double dipped there, but the funny thing is you can make the argument that Stenberg's a better prospect than Jackson. Even though Stenberg is probably the worst pass blocker in this draft, his run blocking is insane, tough kid, really durable, played really, really well at Kentucky. I think Stenberg has more of a chance of working out than Jackson. I had a higher grade on Stenberg. I really, really did. Quintez Cephas was one of my sleeper picks that I went over the Monday after the draft. It was really fun watching him play at Wisconsin. He just jumped off the television screen. A lot of people didn't like him because he was viewed as a good athlete, but not a good football player. But you don't catch 60 passes for 900 yards and 7 touchdowns if you're not a good player. Especially at Wisconsin. Alright, he wasn't doing this at North Dakota State. He was doing this in Wisconsin. The Big Ten. He's a fiery player. He has good separation skills. He has good ball skills. The Lions have an issue at wide receiver coming up soon. Marvin Jones, Kenny Golladay, and Danny Amendola are all going to be free agents soon. They're going to need to find guys who Stafford can throw passes to. And I think Cephas can be that for the Lions for the next 5 to 10 years. That was a really good pick to me. In a draft loaded with running backs, the Lions managed to mess up both their picks that went to running backs. DeAndre Swift made no sense for him. If they wanted to add another backup to compete with Johnson and Scarborough, that's fine. But not in the 2nd round, and definitely not Jason Huntley. This guy is a special teamer. Best case scenario, he's Ty Montgomery. I mean, he's a guy without a position. He may play wide receiver, even though he's really short at 5'9". He can't play running back. At first contact, he folds like a cheap suit. Look, if the Lions wanted to take him as a special teamer, I understand that. Not in the 5th round. And especially not after you took a running back in Swift. You want to tell me you're going to have him as a wide receiver? Okay. Not after you took Quintez Cephas. You want to tell me he's just going to play special teams? Okay. Not in the 5th round. There's no way that pick makes sense. I hate what the Lions have done this offseason. It's amazing how they've wasted Matthew Stafford's career. It's amazing how the Lions waited until the 6th round to fill their biggest need, which was defensive tackle. And John Penisini, I mean, he's a durable player. He's solid against the run, tough player. I'm just not sure how much of an impact he's going to be able to have. His pass rushing skills are anemic. He's not athletic. He's not very tall. He's 6'1". I didn't think he jumped off the tape at Utah. I just don't see him being what the Lions need at defensive tackle. And make no mistake about it, that was their biggest need. I understand they have Danny Shelton, but starting opposite him is John Atkins as of right now. I have no idea who that is. Jashawn Cornell made sense in the 7th round. Solid player at OSU. Good spin move, good athleticism. He's not very strong, he's not good with his hands, but he's worth a shot in the 7th round. I don't mind that pick. All in all, I really have to punish the Lions for some bad picks. I love the Okudah pick. I like the Okwara pick. Logan Stenberg made sense, but not after taking Jonah Jackson. Quintez Cephas was a great pick. But it's hard for me to give them anything better than a C+. I just think the Swift, Jackson, and Huntley picks drive down their grade a lot. We can love Okudah all we want, but if you surround him with garbage, that's going to bring down the grade. Alright, it's time for this day in sports history. On this day in 1921, Hal Newhouser was born. It's okay if you don't know the name Hal Newhouser. The guy pitched in the 40s and 50s. But in that era, he was one of the best pitchers in baseball. His first 3 years in the majors was when he was 18 to 20 years old. In those 3 years, he was atrocious. Went 18 and 21 with a 4.83 ERA. And he seemed destined to just be a footnote in baseball history. But then World War II happened. Hal Newhouser was ineligible to be drafted to serve in World War II because he had an issue with his heart. One of the valves in his heart didn't work properly. So even though Newhouser wanted to join the service, he couldn't. But you know what? It was the best thing that could have ever happened for his baseball career, because in 1942, he made the All-Star team and dominated. I mean, he played for some lousy Tigers teams in 42 and 43, so that kept his win total down. Despite being an All-Star and having a 2.45 ERA in 42 and a 3.04 ERA in 43, he finished with 8 wins in both of those years. In those 2 years, he went 16 and 31. But in 1944, the Tigers hit their stride. Newhouser won 29 games, finished with a 2.22 ERA, led the majors in strikeouts, and won MVP. In 1945, he followed it up by winning 25 games with a 1.81 ERA, led the majors in strikeouts again with 212, and won MVP again. He is the only pitcher in baseball history to repeat as MVP. In 45, the Tigers went up against the Cubs in the World Series. Newhouser started 3 games, 1, 5, and 7. He got shellacked in Game 1, didn't make it out of the 3rd inning. Game 5, he pitched a complete game, got the win, but wasn't great. Gave up 4 runs. He wasn't great. He wasn't terrible, he wasn't great. But then Game 7 happened. And Newhouser pitched another complete game, only gave up 3 runs, and had 10 strikeouts. To pitch a complete game in a Game 7 is nothing short of insane. You remember when I said that Newhouser repeated as MVP? He almost three-peated. In 46, he went 26-9 with a 1.94 ERA and 275 strikeouts. That didn't lead the league, though. The man who led the majors in strikeouts that year was Bob Feller, who had come back from World War II to go 26-15 with 348 strikeouts and a 2.18 ERA. But Newhouser finished second in MVP voting that year to Ted Williams. Can you imagine a pitcher finishing in the top 2 in MVP voting for 3 straight years? That's insane. In 47, he made an All-Star team, went 17-17 with a 2.87 ERA and 24 complete games. He was remarkably durable in 48, 21-12 with a 3.01 ERA. After that, his career wound down. 49, he was good, not great. 18-11, 3.36 ERA. Led the American League in hits and earned runs. 1950, he wasn't that good, finished with an over 4.3 ERA, and then after that he started to get hurt a lot. I'll fast forward to get to the really interesting part of Newhouser's life. He was a scout for the Astros in 1992. The Astros had the first overall pick in that draft. The Astros ended up taking Phil Nevin. Okay, fine. Phil Nevin made an All-Star team, hit .270 in his career. He was a good player. But Newhouser didn't want the Astros to take him. Instead, he wanted the Astros to take Derek Sanderson Jeter. Can you imagine how different history would have been if the Astros had taken Jeter? Think about this lineup for a second. Jeter, Bagwell, Biggio, and Berkman. Just to name a few, with Roy Oswalt on the mound. Brad Lidge as the closer. That team probably would have won multiple World Series. Certainly one. I think you put Jeter on the 05 Astros. The White Sox definitely don't sweep the Astros, and they may even win that series outright. I mean, Jeter was a great postseason performer. That's what none of those Astros were. They needed a guy like Jeter. And who knows, maybe one of those late 90s, early 2000s teams goes on a crazy run to win a World Series. I mean, no Jeter, less pennants for the Yankees. Less World Series for the Yankees. Who's playing short? It's an interesting piece of alternate history. Hal Newhouser was one of the best pitchers of his era, and in 1992, the Astros definitely should have listened to him. Although, I'm glad they didn't. Alright, it's time for another Mount Rushmore. We're on the Texas Rangers now, and this one was really tough. Like, tougher than you'd think. I remember watching old clips of those Rangers teams that fell to the Yankees in back-to-back ALDSs. And actually lost to them in 3 of 4 ALDSs. 96, 98, and 99. Those were good teams. They didn't show it in the playoffs, but those were really good teams. And they had really good players. A-Rod, Wangan, I-Rod, Rafael Palmeiro was there in 99. Really good teams. And then later on, they had guys like Michael Young and Adrian Beltre. I mean, people don't remember this. They made back-to-back World Series to start off the decade in the 20-teens. They lost in 5 games to the Giants. Yeah, that was a romp. But 2011 was a back-and-forth affair. It went 7 games. Game 6 is one of the greatest games in modern baseball history. It went 11 innings. How many people outside of St. Louis remember the David Freese home run? This was a really tough Mount Rushmore to come up with, but I stand by it. The correct Mount Rushmore is Ivan Rodriguez, Michael Young, Juan Gonzalez, and Charlie Huff. I-Rod, when he was with the Rangers, was the best catcher of his era, and for my money, is the best catcher in baseball history. Has the most hits out of any catcher. Won an MVP in 99. Numerous Gold Gloves, 13 to be exact. I mean, I know this wasn't for the Rangers. This was with the Florida Marlins against the Giants, but the way he dominated the 03 NLDS is insane. Just go back and watch some of those old clips. And it gave us a great Chris Russo moment. One time! Not 20! One lousy time! Michael Young holds numerous Rangers hitting records, had an MVP caliber season in 2011, but obviously didn't win it because Justin Verlander was insane that year. 7-time All-Star, perennially underrated because he was playing in the same era as guys like Jeter, A-Rod, and Nomar. Juan Gonzalez, one of the most feared sluggers of his era, leads the Rangers in home runs, 2-time MVP, and one of those years, 96, when he won MVP, he didn't even make the All-Star team. That's insane. I don't know if he's the only MVP winner to not make an All-Star team in the year he was named MVP, but he's got to be one of the few. And Charlie Huff is the Rangers' all-time leader in wins and strikeouts by a pitcher. That's a pretty good trivia question right there. Tomorrow, you'll most likely get the trifecta. Maybe there will even be some sports news to talk about. Major League Baseball coming back. The NHL coming back. The NBA coming back. Maybe some football news. I have no earthly idea. One thing I do know is that I am Jacob Valk saying, what's one home run? If you hit one, they're going to want you to hit more.